You are 22 years old, standing on the roof of the telephone exchange on Torkkelinkatu in Viipuri, splicing a dead line, when the building under you starts ringing and doesn't stop. It is the morning of November 30th, 1939. You don't see the war begin. You hear it, the switchboard filling with voices from the border, frontier guards reading off place names the way men read a weather report. Kualajärvi, Petsamo, Suojärvi. Below you, the streets are still full of people walking to work, because nobody in Viipuri has ever heard an air raid siren, and nobody knows what the ringing means. A clerk comes out on the roof and says the Russians have crossed the frontier from the Gulf of Finland to the Arctic Ocean. You climb down the ladder. Inside, someone is already saying the sentence you will remember for the rest of your life. They're bombing Helsinki. Your name is Eero Toivonen, and 2 weeks earlier your biggest problem was your father. Vilho had a farm in Sekijärvi, a few miles west of the old border, and he could not understand why a grown man climbed telephone poles for a living when the sawmill paid better and the farm would one day be yours. You live most of the week in Viipuri, in a rented room above the exchange, because the telephone company needs a man who understands wires. Your mother Aili still argues with your father in Karelian dialect out of habit. Your sister Kerttu, 18, works a switchboard in Helsinki, and your brother Paavo, 17, spends autumns with your mother's people on the shore of Lake Ladoga, near Sortavala. You are supposed to marry Aino Kahu in the spring. She works the foreign exchange desk at a bank and possesses the irritating ability to remember every promise you make. On the last Sunday of peacetime, November 26th, while the papers argue about something called the Mainila incident, a village shelled, Moscow says, by Finnish artillery, though the shells were Soviet and the village was Soviet and the dead were Soviet. Aino makes you promise one thing. When this ends, tell me what it was you laughed. Nobody expects the war to last past the thaw. Before dawn on November 30th, the Red Army crosses the frontier, and the war that was supposed to be a telephone call away reaches Viipuri on the lines you strung with your own hands. Finland was not defended by winter alone, as the stories later said. It is true that the cold hurt the Red Army badly, but the winter was a weapon both sides owned, and the real advantage was smaller and uglier. Finland is a country about the size of Montana with fewer than 4 million people, and its army had been told for the entire decade exactly where the attack would come. The Karelian Isthmus, the neck of land between Viipuri and Leningrad, is maybe 70 miles wide, and the Finns had spent years building a chain of bunkers and fieldworks across it, called the Mannerheim Line. Behind that line you are issued an old uniform and a rifle, and you learn that your trade has made you valuable. The army has telephones and radios, and not enough men who understand them. You stop being a rifleman your first week. You become the man who fixes the wire, which means you are always near the officers, which means you hear things the other men don't, which is its own kind of loneliness. In December, your battalion is moved north of the line, into the forests of Ladoga, Karelia, where the war stops resembling anything from the training manuals. The Soviet columns move down the roads, because the roads are the only places tanks can go, and the Finns move across the snow beside the roads and cut them into pieces. The word the whole world will learn is moti, a cord of firewood, and it becomes the name for a pocket of encircled enemy. At Suomussalmi, in deep cold, 2 Soviet divisions are fed into a forest road and destroyed. The men in your company count the captured artillery the way fishermen count the catch. It is your first lesson in what Finland has instead of numbers. The ability to put 1,000 men exactly where the enemy's map says nothing is. You meet the 2 men who will carry you through the war in the same week. The first is Sergeant Erkki Hämäläinen, 47 years old, from Sortavala, a veteran of the Civil War in 1918 and just about everything since. He speaks rarely and precisely, and one night, watching Soviet flares drift over the tree line, he gives you the sentence that will become the spine of your life. He points at the road full of burning trucks and says, "They have the map, we have the ground. A man who owns the ground he stands on will not be moved." You think about that for the rest of the winter. The second man is Raino, a lumberman from Nurmes, the loudest man in the battalion, who talks non-stop about his village's sauna, as if it were a woman he was faithful to. Raino carries a puko he carved himself, a short knife with the word Koti burned into the birch handle. Home. When you ask why he carved that instead of his name, he says nobody wants to find a dead man's name in the snow, but anybody'd want to find their way home. That is the whole of his philosophy. He talks about home the way other men talk about God. The fighting has a rhythm you learn to hate. The Soviet artillery sounds like a train that never arrives. The snipers are worse than the artillery. One of the men in a sister battalion becomes so efficient with his iron sights that the Russians send counter-snipers and mortars against him, and back home they will call him the White Death. Records would credit him with more than 500 kills. You hear about him the way you hear about weather. Meanwhile, at a river line called Kolar, where the attacks keep breaking, the command posts relay a message that becomes a legend. Will Kolar hold? Kolar holds. It holds. In Helsinki, the government broadcasts that the bombs the Soviets are dropping on cities are bread for the starving Finnish people. So the country names the cluster bombs Molotov bread baskets, and in answer invents a drink, a bottle of spirits, a wad of tar, a burning rag, and a tank that costs more than the bottle that killed it. You are not fighting for glory. You are fighting to make the price of taking Finland too high for anyone to want to pay it. It almost works. On December 14th, the League of Nations, the only time in its history, expels the Soviet Union for aggression. The news reaches your trench as a rumor, and the men cheer, and you all believe the world is coming to help. It is not coming. France and Britain argue about sending an expedition. Sweden and Norway refuse the transit. By the time anyone decided anything, the war was already being lost. About 11,000 foreign volunteers arrived anyway, and you remember them the way you remember a good meal, briefly and with affection. They bought time. They did not buy victory. Then February comes, and the Red Army learns. The Second Battle of Suma begins with a bombardment that goes on for days, and you lie in a bunker that shakes like a ship, and the telephone line you are guarding goes dead every hour, and every hour you crawl out and fix it. The Mannerheim line is not a wall. It is a chain of strongpoints, and the strongpoints have flanks, and the flanks have ends. On February 11th, the Russians break through near Suma, and the line that cost a decade to build is gone in a week. Sergeant Erkki is last seen standing at a crossroads with a rifle, waving retreating men toward the reserves, which is all he ever was. A man pointing other men towards safe ground. You never see him again. You don't have time to look. The retreat east of Viipuri is what you will remember as the worst of the war, worse than the battles. The sound of everything coming apart without any single moment of catastrophe, just a long slide. In March, Viipuri is nearly surrounded. The Red Army crosses the frozen Viipuri Bay with its heaviest artillery. Your unit digs in at the city's edge, and you already know the end of the story, because everyone knows the end of the story. The peace is signed in Moscow on March 12th. The ceasefire begins at 11 in the morning on March 13th. Men die in the last hour of a war that was already over because the order traveled slower than the shells. Then the guns stop, and the silence is the loudest thing you have ever heard. Finland has lost the war. Finland has not lost what matters. The officers tell you, and you will spend the next 5 years trying to decide if that sentence is true. The Moscow Peace Treaty cedes the Karelian Isthmus and the shore of Ladoga, 11% of the country. The Saimaa Canal, which Finland built and Finland lost. A naval base at Hanko, leased for 30 years. And more than 400,000 people, 1 in every 9 Finns, must leave their homes with no destination and no date of return and no promise. Your father Vilho loads a cart with the horse, the tools, the iron stove, and the good coffee pot. Your mother walks out of the farmhouse without locking the door, because there is nothing left in the world worth locking. You meet them at the train with the field telephone you carried through the war, and he gives you something you have never seen him use, his compass, the one with the cracked glass. Because, he says, a man without bearings is a liability even in a forest, he knows. Then he cries, which you have never seen, which you will never see again. You will carry that compass into 2 more wars. You spend 15 months building a new life in a province your mother calls the new country. On a plot of land, the government gives the evacuees. The line between 1940 and 1941 is the strangest year of your life, peace. But the same bad peace, with the same neighbors waiting. The land you were born on is now a country you can see across a river. Your father plants an apple orchard in soil his hands don't trust. You and Eino postpone the wedding twice and stop telling people why. Then on June 22nd, 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. 3 days later, 460 Soviet aircraft strike 18 18 Finnish towns, and Finland is at war again. You are not given a choice, and the country barely gives itself one. On July 10th, Marshal Mannerheim issues his order of the day. He will not return his sword to its scabbard until Karelia is free. Half the country believes him. You are not the half that believes. But you answer the call, because the farm is behind you and the map is in front of you, and because the ground he told you about is on the other side of the line. The continuation war has begun, and you go back to your old rank, your old wire, your old trade. By the end of August 1941, the army is back at the 1940 border and across it. On August 29th, the flag goes up over Viipuri, and you come home. The word home turns out to mean a city with a blown bridge, a burned station, and your father's orchard, dead from neglect and winter fighting. The farmhouse is a chimney and a foundation. You stand in the yard where your mother used to hang washing, and you understand something you will never be able to say to anyone. You spent 2 winters fighting to get back to a place, and the place did not survive the getting back. People say war changes you. What it actually does is change the address. The army does not stop at the old border. It pushes into East Karelia toward the river Svir, toward the White Sea, and the more it advances, the less it resembles the war you knew. This is occupation now. In the occupied town the Russians called Petrozavodsk and the Finns call Einislina, a camp goes up behind barbed wire for civilians who are not, in the language of the officers, kindred peoples. It is a fact you will spend the rest of your life explaining to people who do not want to hear it. Finland, the country that fought so the world would remember it, ran concentration camps of its own. Tens of thousands of civilians went behind the wire. Roughly 4,000 of them died, and most of the dead were children and the old. Of the 4,000 children held in those camps, more than 1,000 never came out. You are ordered to lay telephone wire along the camp perimeter in 1942, and you do it because refusal means courts-martial, and the wire has to be laid by someone. You do not tell your mother what the wire runs past. Your brother Paavo, 20 now, serves toward the Svir and writes letters that are careful, and then less careful, and then one letter that goes quiet in the middle, as if he had stood up to say something and sat back down. You both learn the same lesson in the same months. A country can be in the right and still do the wrong thing, and those two facts can be true without canceling each other. Nobody prepares a soldier for that. It is the part of the war that never demobilizes. That same year, something else happens that you will keep from the family letters. Around 300 Jewish men serve in the Finnish army, and in the summer of 1942, within sight of the German lines, they are given a field synagogue, an officer's tent, and time off to pray, side by side with soldiers whose other allies are killing their relatives a few hundred miles south. It is impossible. It is documented. And in November 1942, the country that prayed beside Jewish soldiers in one war hands 8 Jewish refugees to the Gestapo in exchange for nothing, and one of the 8 ever comes back. You are not there for any of it. You are in a trench, fixing the wire. But you carry both facts for the rest of your life, the way you carry everything else. Without comment, without order. The front goes quiet for 2 years. The quiet is the worst part, because there is nothing to do except think, and thinking is where the war lives. Then June 9th, 1944, at 5:55 in the morning, the world ends. The Soviet offensive opens with a barrage that you feel through the soles of your boots before you hear it. The line east of Valkeasaari is gone in a day. By June 10th, the first defense belt is overrun, and this time there is no Mannerheim line, no Moti, no winter. There is arithmetic. The army trades ground for time, and the time is spent on one thing, that civilians. The order goes out, evacuate the isthmus, and some 2 again people take to the roads again. The same roads, the same carts, the same faces, 4 years older. You lay wire ahead of a retreat, and you see the columns of families moving west, while your battalion moves east to buy them another day. And you understand the real plan of the war at last. The front was never supposed to hold forever. It was supposed to hold long enough. Every hour of fighting is paid for in the army's own coin. Itself, on June 20th, Viipuri falls. The second time is worse than the first, because the first time was the enemy's war, and the second time feels like your own failure, though you know, and will always know, that it was math. On June 22nd, Moscow demands surrender, unconditional, with terms to be named later, which is the way empires talk to countries they intend to swallow. On June 26th, President Ritti writes a personal letter to Hitler binding himself, not the parliament, not the country, to no separate peace. It is the most expensive sentence ever written in Finnish. In exchange, German assault guns and thousands of Panzerfausts arrive in the week the front needs them most. You are at Tali-Ihantala at the end of June, when the Soviet 21st Army commits everything it has left, some 150,000 men and hundreds of tanks, to crack the isthmus defense before the summer is over. It is the largest battle ever fought in the Nordic countries, and you fight it at a headquarters platoon, half buried, keeping the radio and the field telephone alive through 3 days of shelling, because the war, for you, has always been a question of wire. Reno dies at Tali on the second day. It is not heroic. He is carrying a roll of telephone wire across a field. He volunteered because he was the only one who could still make you laugh when a mortar round, fired blind from behind a tree line, aimed at no one, lands beside him. He falls next to a birch. There is last word, no final gesture, no slow fade. The war takes him between two sentences, the way it takes most men. His kit is gathered by the platoon sergeant, and in it is the puko, koti still legible on the handle, worn almost smooth from his hand. They give it to you because you are the last man who knew what it meant. You put it in your pocket. You have not taken it out of your pocket since, which is not something you choose. It is something the pocket does. Tali-Ihantala holds. By early July, the Soviet attack has bled itself dry on a front the Finns will not give up, because behind it is everything. In early August, at Ilomantsi, north of the isthmus, the army does the thing everyone said this war could no longer do. It encircles 2 Soviet divisions in the forest and destroys them as an organized force, the same way it did at Suomussalmi in 1940. It is the last victory of the old way of war, and it changes nothing about the outcome. What it does is give the country a floor to negotiate from. On September 19, 1944, the Moscow Armistice is signed. The borders of 1940 come back, which means everything you fought for since 1941 is gone. Karelia again, Viipuri again, your father's third farm, your brother's grave sites, your own 2 dam wars. Petsamo goes. Porkkala, west of Helsinki, is leased for 50 years. The country owes $300 million in reparations, paid in ships and machinery it does not have. There is one more act, and it is the strangest of all. The armistice requires Finland to drive the German army out of the country, and so you are sent north to fight the men who were your allies the week before, the men who shared your artillery, your mess halls, your token of the winter. On September 15th, the Germans attack Suusaari Island to grab it before the Finns can, and the garrison fights them off and takes more than 1,000 prisoners, men who 3 months earlier were fighting on the same side of the world. In Lapland, the war is called the Button War because the soldiers hardly ever see each other, and the only things exchanged are the buttons off uniforms, traded as souvenirs by men who were brothers in arms and are now enemies by treaty. The Germans retreat north in good order, burning as they go. Rovaniemi burns, 9 in 10 buildings gone. Your unit is never in a real battle. It is in a vast, slow, sad argument conducted with dynamite and cold. The last Germans walk out at Kilpisjärvi in April 1945. The war against the Soviet Union ended in September. The war against Germany ends now, in the same country, with the same men, over a border nobody wanted to draw. You are demobilized in the spring of 1945. You go back to the rented farm in the new country, where your mother is alive, your father is alive, Aino is alive, Paavo is alive. During the retreat in June 1944, the army listed you as missing for 3 weeks, and your mother lit a candle in the church of the new parish, and at the end of the 3rd week Kertu found you. It is the one miracle of your war, and it happened on the wires you laid. She was working a trunk exchange in Helsinki, routing a military call, and she recognized your voice on the line. She talked to a dead man for 4 minutes before she said your name. That is the war's whole arithmetic in one sentence. The country spent 5 years trying to kill each other's children, and the only thing that saved yours was your sister's memory of how you sound. After the war, there are trials. The country that fought for its freedom is told it must account for the war it fought, and the leaders go to prison. Riti gets 10 years of hard labor, pardoned in 1949, and the reparations go on year after year, and Finland builds the ships and the machines, discovers it can build them, and pays the whole thing off by 1952. You are interviewed once, in 1946, by a commission looking into the camps in East Karelia. The man across the table asks if you saw the wire, the children, the dead. You say yes. He asks whose fault it was. You say you don't know, and it is the only honest answer you will ever give anyone about anything. There is one more accounting, and it is the one you carry. The supply officer at Eenislina, a man named Tauno, was the most hated man in the district. Everyone said he ran the black market, selling off army stores, growing fat on the occupation. You believed it. Everyone believed it. In the summer of 1944, when the army pulled out of East Karelia, and the camps were opened and the internees were sent on the roads back toward their own lines, you were rear guard, and you walked through the storehouse Tauno had run, and it was not empty. There was rye, there was canned milk, there were blankets by the hundred, packed in crates labeled for a non-existent unit, waiting with the doors unlocked for the columns passing west. The man the whole district called a thief had been stealing for 2 years to feed the people behind the wire. His ledgers said the food was sold to the black market, and the profit column, which his officers read, was the price of his silence. You never spoke to him. He disappeared into the retreat, and the last you hear years later is that a Russian woman from Eenislina went to the Finnish authorities in the 50s to give evidence that a Finnish officer had saved her son, and nobody could find the file on a man named Tauno because the file said thief. So you are left with the things you know for certain. The map is big, the ground is small, and the men who own the ground they stand on, it turns out, are not always the men on your side of the line. Erkki was right and wrong at the same time, and it takes you 30 years to understand that both sentences are doing their work together. Years later, when the papers announce that Porkkala is coming back in 1956, and then when the reparations are done and the flags go up, you stand in the yard of the farm your father planted and your father died on. He died in 1952, in the orchard he never trusted, which fruited anyway, and your daughter, who was born in the new country, asks you what the war was for. You don't have an answer that fits on a school form. You tell her about 1940, when 400,000 people walked out of the only country they had, and your mother carried the coffee pot, and your father carried the horse, and you carried a telephone and a knife. You tell her the country fought 2 wars and lost both and stayed free, which is a sentence that should be impossible, and was in fact the whole of it. She asks if you ever went back to see it. You say yes, every night. She thinks you mean in dreams, and you don't correct her, because the correction is a long story, and the day's work is waiting. In the barn, under a tarp, is the field telephone. You take it down once a year, in the spring, and you lift the handset to your ear. There is nothing on the line. There hasn't been anyone on the line for 40 years. It is the same silence as the one after March 13, 1940, and it is the only sound you have ever fully trusted. In your pocket is the pukko, and the word on the handle is still koti, home, worn soft as a river stone, and you have carried it through 3 wars and 2 pieces and 1 country that no longer exists. You put the telephone back under the tarp. You walk out of the barn, across the yard your father planted, past the orchard that fruited anyway, toward the porch of the house that was never the house you were born in. The map changed. The ground didn't. You stand on it, where you have stood for 40 years, where you will stand until someone carries you off it to the churchyard, and the ground is the only possession that ever held. You keep walking.